Welcome to In the Arena of Success. This podcast is where courage meets opportunity. I'm your host, Henry Biemann, and every week we step into the arena with visionaries, innovators, and trailblazers from all walks of life. We dive deep into the heart of success and uncover the strategies, the struggles, and the unwavering spirit of those who overcome. The real question is, are you willing to step into the arena and fight for your success? Because in this arena, success is not a destination. It's a journey, and it starts right now. All right, welcome back. I have with me today Major General retired Mike Milano. He has commanded at every level in the Army, including installation command, leading troops in combat, and after retiring from the Army, went on to senior leadership at Target Corporation and is now in a consulting firm and leading leadership battlefield tours. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, it is.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So the first 6 questions, I ask the same ones of every guest, kind of in a lightning round format, pretty rapid fire. And the first of those is, where's your hometown and what is it known for?
Hometown, honestly, is where I happen to be in the moment. I have moved over 35 times in my life. I moved 10 times as a kid before I got out of high school. I went to 5 different schools from 6th to 12th grade. And here's the thing, my dad wasn't in the military. He was a very ambitious businessman. So I moved all over the United States, and 21 moved in the Army and so forth. I was born in Detroit. We lived there just for a couple of years. So I guess technically Detroit's my hometown. And as you know, the Tigers and the Lions and the Pistons all were great at one time decades ago, but they've just been struggling lately. Although the Tigers are playing some decent baseball right now.
I was going to say, the Tigers have had a pretty good run so far.
Yeah, but that's where I was born, Detroit.
Okay. And do you prefer cats or dogs?
Yeah.
That's a pretty...
My wife's twin sister has 2 cats. They're siblings, and they're only about a year and a half, 2 years old now. But they just don't do a lot, you know. I mean, dogs are a lot more fun. I don't have a dog right now because we live in 2 different places during the year. But once we're settled down in one place, we're going to get a dog. I had dogs as a kid to get a dog, but not while we're doing, a lot of movement back and forth.
That's the hard part. Cats do a little bit better when you leave them alone for a while, and dogs not so much. They're great companions, though.
Right. Absolutely.
What kind of music do you enjoy listening to?
Well, this may surprise you, but I've been to probably well over 50 Grateful Dead shows in my life. I went to my first one in 1975. I most recently saw them last summer out in Boulder, Colorado, Dead and Company. So I'm a huge fan of the Grateful Dead, but honestly, any rock and roll. I love blues as well. I play guitar, and I really like to play acoustic blues. So blues and rock and roll essentially, but my sons, who are both gifted musicians, have turned me on to some really awesome music. For example, funk. I never really got into funk much until they exposed me to Funkadelic, and I gotta tell you, it's outstanding. So I'm open to anything that's good, frankly.
Talking about blues guitar, living here in Mississippi, there's a lot of great blues joints.
Oh my goodness, yeah, absolutely.
So what's on your reading list right now?
I just finished a book called Take Over, and it was about how Hitler came to power in Nazi Germany in 1933, 1930, consolidated power. Fascinating story, actually, and it's just something to think about in these turbulent political times that we find ourselves in right now today. And then I went back and read a couple of classics by William Somerset Maugham, Of Human Bondage and The Razor's Edge. So I like good literature, but I also like reading about history and leaders, frankly. I'm about ready to start the biography of Steve Jobs that Walter Isaacson wrote a few years ago. No, in my queue for a while, but
It's sitting right here on my bookshelf next to me over here. It's a tome. I haven't quite picked it up yet. I started to look at it and haven't quite had the courage to jump all the way into it.
we just established common ground, you and I, right there.
It's like Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. It's one of those that sits there and you look at it and think, one day I'm going to read that. Or Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged. That's another one that's sitting on my list over here to read. But so, talking about books, you recently released a book called Large and in Charge No More, Journey to Vulnerable Leadership.
Yeah.
So that should be on most folks' reading lists because vulnerability in leadership is one of those topics that I don't think's talked enough about. So tell us a little bit about your book.
You're exactly right. There's a big misconception about vulnerability. In fact, when you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see it defined as weak, open to attack, assailable, and so forth. And when actually I think vulnerability is the basis of nearly every positive leadership skill we can think about. Humility, authenticity, and so forth. So vulnerability is a superpower. And vulnerability is willing to acknowledge that there are people with superior skills, knowledge, and abilities to yours. You want to surround yourself with those kind of people. Vulnerability is getting comfortable being uncomfortable, trying something new, even though you may suck at it, going for it because you may learn something out of it. Vulnerability is apologizing. Vulnerability is being willing to engage with people. It's a skill that a lot of people, and I write in my book about times in my past, when I look back, when I was not vulnerable, and how the situation maybe could have improved had I been, but also a couple of opportunities I had in my career, and I didn't know what to call it at the time, Henry, but I was vulnerable, and I learned, I grew so much out of those experiences. So the idea for the book, and I don't mean to go on here, but the idea for the book came after I spent 7 years with Target Corporation, after I retired from Target. There were a couple of things about Target's culture that really caused me to think, after 7 years with that company, that, wow, I think I'm a more effective leader than when I left the Army.
Wow.
And when I dug into why, I mean, my aperture, my lens was broadened in terms of what effective leadership looks like, because there were some things about Target's culture. It's feedback intensive, for example. You're expected to give feedback laterally, downwards, upwards. And if you weren't actively soliciting feedback about yourself, things that you wanted to get better at as a leader, then you weren't doing your job. Again, this was baked into their culture. Another thing about Target's culture is that problems were to be celebrated. It was good to have problems, because if you didn't have problems as a leader, you weren't digging deep enough. You weren't looking hard enough at your organization. And then collaborating to bring in outside experts to help you solve those problems. Well, these were two aspects of Target's culture that were not necessarily front and center with the Army culture, but they really helped me understand what effective leadership can look like. And so I got to thinking about this, talking to my friend and mentor, Rick Lynch, and he started bugging me you need to write a book. And I said, yeah, sure, like I have time to write a book. He said, hey, dumbass, I wrote a book. You can write a book. And so I owe a lot to him. He pestered me and stayed on me to write this book. And he's written a great book about leadership, by the way. It's called Adapt or Die, Battle-Tested Principles of Leadership. It's outstanding. And so he stayed after me. And so my wife's twin sister is a writer, and I hired her as my co-author, and together over 3 years we put this book together.
Wow, that's a cool story.
Yeah.
And part of what you mentioned there leads right into the next question, as you talked about surrounding yourself with smart people and seeking feedback. The next question that we have on the list here is, who is your biggest inspiration in life?
Okay. One is my wife, and I'll tell you why. the spouse of an officer, especially a senior officer in the military, you know this, there are a lot of expectations of those spouses. And my wife is a career pediatric dietitian. And she always tried to work where we were. We had kids and all that, but she wanted a career, but she very dutifully did all those things and more that were expected of her as a spouse. She never complained about it, and she was a tremendous benefit to me. She just got her doctorate 5 years ago at the age of 60. And I'm so proud of her for that, because she got her master's in 1983 till 2019 to finish her doctorate. Well, she couldn't do it because of all the moving around we did. But this was a goal of hers. Right. She wanted to do that, and now she's teaching at North Central College here in Naperville. So she's very inspiring to me because of her determination and her grit and so forth. The other person who's an inspiration to me is my driver in Iraq, Steve Vasquez. Steve was blinded in a roadside bomb attack instantly. The sergeant sitting next to him, Sergeant Cota, was killed instantly, but Steve was blinded. All the orbital bones around his eyes were fractured, and he was blinded instantly. Steve's the most resilient, inspiring person I know today, because he leads a foundation called Blind Endeavors. He's trying to help other blind veterans cope and adapt and so forth. He's a medal-winning para-Olympic athlete. He's a championship tandem cyclist. He's the #2 guy on a bike. He's climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. He does downhill skiing. He's setting up a modified Tough Mudder event this summer at Fort Carson, Colorado, for blind veterans. Each of them will have a guide. He's remarkable. He is determined to try to help other people deal with what he's had to deal with. And I frankly can't imagine Henry instantaneously losing my sight. I have a business partner who has gradually lost his sight over his life due to macular degeneration. But to instantly, at the age of 21, you lose your sight. But what he's doing, nevertheless, is just remarkably inspiring. So those two people, I would say, are the most inspiring people in the world.
That resonates very clearly with me, and
Sure.
The sacrifice of my wife for my career and the time that I was active duty in the Army, moving every couple of years and not being able to settle down. It's an incredible thing that our spouses do. And some of the men and women that I had the pleasure to care for are the most inspiring people. They sacrifice, they've given so much, but yet they turn around and want to give more. And it's an incredible thing. And, so the follow-on to that is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Sucks. Do every job the very best you can. I had a couple of jobs that I wasn't too keen on going into. In fact, I almost got fired from one of them because I failed to adapt upwards. Thankfully, I was rescued. But the lesson was, and this was the guidance I got from my boss, was, hey man, first of all, you're going to do what the Army tells you to do. And secondly, no matter how distasteful, do it the best you can. So, for example, when I was a brigade combat team commander, you go through cycles of training: green, yellow, red. Green, which means you're in training phase; red, you're support. Well, if your job as a support brigade is, to do all the post details and cut the grass and all that, then damn it, do the very best grass cutting job that the installation's ever seen, and lead your soldiers to think that way. So that was some great advice. You're not always going to get the pick of the litter in terms of great jobs and so forth, but somebody's got to do them. So just do the very best you can.
Right. That post detail reminds me of a time at Fort Moore. Was actually during the COVID pandemic. I was commanding a medical unit there, and all of my troops were busy managing the chaos of the COVID pandemic and keeping the training pipeline open. And here comes the tasking down for my unit to go do trash detail around the main road on main post. I said, what the heck is going on here? Don't they know what we're doing? So all my platoon sergeants were trying to figure out who they were going to send, and I said, nope, the platoon leaders and I are going out. We're going to go do it.
Yeah.
And so the officers let the troops keep doing what they were doing, and we went and did the trash detail. And we got some funny looks.
Awesome. Well, leading by example right there, yeah.
But, you know, we had an important mission to accomplish at the time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't sacrifice them for picking up some trash on the side of the road. But it was a good leadership example and a good learning curve for me.
Totally.
So talking about all those things and moving back, where does your story start for you?
Great question. My intention in both, accepting and then turning down the appointment to Annapolis and then the 4-year ROTC scholarship to Lafayette was get somebody else to pay for college. So my plan was have the Army pay for my way to college, get my chemical engineering degree, which I did, pay back my 4 years in the Army, and then get out and make a gazillion bucks as a chemical engineer. I've never done a day of chemical engineering in my life. I've done a resume, okay, but I've never done it. And I stayed 33 years in the Army doing the kind of regimentation I said I couldn't handle. But I would say my story, so I was still fully intent on getting out of the Army after my 4 years. This guy, by the name of Vance Richmond, I was at Fort Knox going to the career course, and he was out of the 82nd Airborne, going to the same course I was. And something about him really attracted me in a professional way and a personal way. He's just an awesome guy. But his enthusiasm, his professionalism, and his engagement and so forth caused me to rethink my plan. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I did. Today, he's my brother-in-law. He's my wife's brother. And he's one of those people who had a profound impact on my life. Mm-hmm. So I stayed in a couple more years. I went to Korea, commanded 2 companies, a tank company, a combat support company. And I finagled an assignment to Washington, D.C. I was still going to get out. My wife had got a great job in Washington, D.C. at Washington Children's Hospital. And then I met individual number 2, Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Snodgrass, who worked in the organization that I was in. I was a captain. And he said, Mike, how'd you like to come to Germany for the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment and work for me? In about a year and a half. Wow, what you see in me? He could have the pick of the litter. The captains were a dime a dozen in the Army. I mean, why me? Well, he saw something in me. And he left and went to command 1st Squadron 11th Cav. He stayed in touch, though, and he brought me over there a year and a half later, 6 months before he was going to turn over command. I ended up commanding for a 3rd time. I was troop commander, then I was a Squadron S3 and so forth. Individuals impacted the trajectory of my career and my life in amazing ways. One, because my brother-in-law was just a remarkable example of commitment and dedication, but he was just a terrific guy to be around. He's one of the coolest people I've ever known. And then this individual, Glenn Snodgrass, reached down and saw something to me, and it was sort of like a mentor role in a way. 2 people. That's kind of where my story began, because I don't know where I would be had I gotten out of the Army and, done something else. But they influenced the rest of the next 30 years of my life. It was pretty.
Wow. Yeah, I think of that as almost like what I would say is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Is the sponsor's not just someone who develops you, but they reach down and grab you and pull you to that next level and give you that opportunity, stand by and allow you to fail if you need to, but coach you through that experience.
It was profound. It really was. Yeah.
That's a interesting experience. So you talked about being a chemical engineer. How did you end up in armor units?
Question. Oh, I was a chemical engineer. I figured, and I did well at ROTC. I figured, okay, I'm going to use my degree in the Army so that when I get out of the Army in 4 years, I can say, well, here's my experience up to this point as a B. And so I decided to go into the chemical corps. The chemical corps in the Army has nothing to do with chemical engineering. Yeah. Big misconception. I went to the chemical officer basic course at Aberdeen, Maryland. And then I was assigned to 2nd Armored Division as my first assignment at now Fort Cavazos, but then Fort Hood, Texas. Well, guess what? If you were not combat arms when you went to the 2nd Armored Division, they put you in a combat arms role for 6 months as a platoon leader. So even though I was a chemical officer, I was a tank platoon leader for 6 months at Fort Hood, Texas, in the 2nd Armored Division. I didn't know my rear end from my elbow about tanks. I knew nothing about how to employ them and so forth. But there I was, tank platoon leader, and I had to prove myself. And so I did that for 6 months, and I really liked it a lot. And then I had to go be a chemical platoon leader, which I hated. So I branch transferred quickly to armor. I went back to being an armor platoon leader, then executive officer, and so forth. So I figured, Henry, if I'm going to be in the Army, even if it's for 4 years, I want to be in the Army. And for me, that was being in a combat arms unit. And I loved everything about tanks. And so that's how I ended up as an armor guy.
Looking at that from your perspective now, that was probably a bit of risk that commander was assuming to put non-armor officers as commanders. But what kind of development did you get out of that? And
oh my God. First and foremost, as you very well know, at every level of the Army, we are paired with a non-commissioned officer as our leadership partner. That's what so platoon sergeant, first sergeant, command sergeant major, and so forth. I was completely reliant on Staff Sergeant Calvin C. Bailey. It was my first platoon sergeant. And he spent Saturdays with me. He spent evenings teaching me how to be technically and tactically proficient. So it was that first assignment, and I carried this through every other job I had. That non-commissioned officer has the unit success in mind. He wants me to be successful. You know, when platoon sergeants are hanging around or first sergeants are hanging around, they don't want to be saying, yeah, my platoon leader's a real jackass. You don't know real. No, they want to be proud of their officer. They want to make him or her look good. And so that experience forged in me how vitally important the Army's non-commissioned officers are, which, as you know, are unique in the world in terms of the responsibilities we give them. But it forged in me the importance of a good bond with your non-commissioned officer, and I carried that through the rest of my career.
That's very true, and the bond with the non-commissioned officer and the officer at all levels of command, all the way to the highest, is one of the most incredible bonds. Many folks relate it to being almost like a marriage.
Henry, it's a kind of relationship where that individual ought to be able to come in. I don't care if you're a general officer and you got a command sergeant major and so forth, your platoon sergeant. Come in, close the door, and say, sir, what the hell is that? Why don't you talk to me first? I could have helped you with that decision. Here's how I think we could have handled that better. That's the kind of relationship you need to have. And it's very much like a marriage. Yeah.
And that brings up a good point, is the counsel and the advisor role that those NCOs play. When was the time in your career that you faced a major obstacle or a challenge that you had to figure out how to overcome, and that played a big role in it?
It's not. I think this will answer your question. So when I deployed to Iraq as a deputy commanding general of the 4th Infantry Division in late 2007, division's commanded by Major General, and then there's 2 1-stars as the deputy commanding generals. I deployed out of Fort Carson, and we went to Baghdad province, and I think you relate to this. About 6, 7, 8 months in, I'm really hitting my stride in terms of knowing what to do, knowing the impact I'm having, knowing who the key points of contact are. We're really making some stuff happen. Uh, I was the assistant division commander of support when we deployed, so I was responsible for helping the Iraqis with providing essential services, water, sewer, electricity, medical care, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm really, it's 15-month deployment. Everything, all 8 cylinders are firing exactly as they should. And then about 7, 8 months into that, General David Petraeus talked to me and he said, "Hey, Mike, congratulations. The Army is going to promote you to Major General. You're going to be the next commanding general of the Civilian Police Advisory Training Team." The right guy? I don't know anything about police training. And by the way, let me tell you all the great stuff that's going on. He said, "Stop. I got it. You're going to do this, and you start in a month." And so it ended up being, about a 20. I didn't have much time to prepare. I didn't know anything about police training. And I was put into a situation where I was totally unprepared for. I had 900 law enforcement professionals from around the world, though, working in my organization. Also had a couple thousand Marines and soldiers who were police training team. I was totally dependent on those law enforcement professionals to help me understand what we needed to get done, how we should do it, and so forth. I was really reliant on them to help me understand the landscape, figure out what the priorities were, and so forth. So, in a way, kind of like with a non-commissioned officer, particularly, as a chemical officer going into a tank platoon leader job, I was dependent on those individuals to set the organization up for success and help me understand how to do my job. It was a very similar thing when I joined Target out of the Army.
Right.
I retired from the Army. I didn't know anything about retail logistics or global supply chains. Zippo. Target hired me based on a connection I had established for my leadership skills. They knew I didn't know anything about the business I was in charge of running. They said, "Trust us. We'll teach you the business," and they did. But first and foremost, Henry, they wanted to make sure I was a good cultural fit.
Mm-hmm.
So my first few months with the company were conditional until I was given a thumbs up by the CEO. But I was totally dependent on my team to help me understand this business that I was responsible for running. My peers were fantastic. So those were 2 instances where I was completely dependent on people who worked for me to help me learn my job and run it successfully.
So you hit on 2 things that I wanted to dig in on a little bit. One of which is going into situations that you feel totally unprepared for seems to be a common thread in your journey.
Well,
And I think that's a common thread in most people's journeys when they're called into a new job. They're leaving college and getting their first job. They're advancing through their career and trying to find the next step and feeling totally unprepared. What was it about your service in the Army that gave you some preparation to step into that unknown?
that, of course, first and foremost, you have a mission to accomplish. And a good officer, a good NCO, a good soldier will understand that I got to get this done. And if I'm honest with myself, I'm not quite sure how to go about doing it. And that's when you start relying on peers and subordinates and soliciting advice and so forth. So I think understanding, yeah, I'm uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do, but we have to accomplish this mission. When I was the commanding general of Fort Knox and I would talk to newly commissioned lieutenants who were in the basic course, talk to them before they graduate, and I'd say, "Okay, I got a question for you. What's more important, mission or men? Mission or soldier?" How many think men? About half of them raise their hand. How many think mission? It's always the mission. And I said, understand something. You are in a profession where sometimes soldiers are going to die or get wounded in accomplishing your mission. Your mission accomplishment is paramount. That's why it's different than going to work for 3M or Target or General Motors or running an. This is the uniqueness. It's like law enforcement. The uniqueness of what we do. Your job as a leader is to do everything you can to prevent loss of life or limb and so forth. But sometimes that's going to happen, and that is part of the profession you are joining. That you join. Understand that.
Right.
So I think it was this overriding sense of mission accomplishment in the military that caused me anyway to realize that I need to reach out to other people to help me accomplish this mission. And that carried with me through a lot of jobs I had in the Army, but also when I transitioned into civilian.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things that I would always tell folks when I was in leadership positions. 3 P's: people, passion, and process. And with people,
Okay.
caring for people doesn't mean going easy on them. I think that's a big misconception. My view of caring for people was sending folks out on the 12-mile forced road march because I'm preparing them for what they may face in the most dangerous situation they're going to encounter. It's the rigorous training. It's giving them the best tools and skills that they have to survive on the battlefield. That was taking care of people. Sure, that if you had the opportunity to send folks home for what we call payday activities early on a Friday, do it. Give them some time with their family. But the taking care of people is not just the, oh, we're going easy on folks. It's really actually, oftentimes, if you're really taking care of people, it's all the more rigorous. But it's done in a culture that's supportive, puts people in alignment with what their passions are, and you follow processes that make things simple and easy and don't waste people's time. Because the how we do things is equally, if not more important than what we do.
Yeah, totally.
I was speaking with a human resources organization the other week, and I talked about, you get that job or the opportunity to do something that sounds really cool, but then you get into the organization and the way they go about doing it isn't exactly as fun as you thought it was going to be.
Right.
And I related the example of I love to go camping, but the way the Army goes camping isn't how I want to go do it on my weekend off.
Right about training, though. I mean, as a trainer, and I was director of training for the Army, I have this rheostat. And you keep making the conditions tougher and tougher and tougher because you want to make the training replicate combat as much as possible. And you keep, raising that bar. And that's how you take care of people. Make
Absolutely.
everything you can to prepare them for the situation that they may encounter. Good point.
So the other piece that you were mentioning in that story is that Target hired you even though you didn't know anything about the job, but you knew leadership and you knew people, just that. So tell me a little bit about your people skills and how you developed that strong leadership ethic.
I didn't really probably understand at the time, but I do a pretty good job of adapting upwards. There was a time in my so Target. I met an individual when I was commanding general of Fort Jackson, as a matter of fact. I was invited to a horse race in Camden, South Carolina. It was in November of 2011. And it's called the Colonial Cup. It's their version of the Derby. Everybody's, got the hats. And no, it was on a Saturday. And my aide said, when we were talking about it, he said, well, you didn't go last year, sir. And because I was going to send my deputy. You didn't go last year, and the governor's going to be there. And I said, okay, I should do this. So I went. And they had me give some remarks in between a couple of races, and I enlisted, 60 new soldiers into the Army. Getting ready to leave, my aide said, hey, sir, there's a hospitality tent over there. You want to stop and get a drink before you head back? I said, hey, good idea, Mike, good idea. I'm there having a drink, picking at the hors d'oeuvre table, and this individual introduces himself saying, hey, I liked your remarks and so forth. I said, yeah, what do you do? He said, I work for Target. I run the big distribution center here in Camden. I said, oh, okay. Gave me his card, stuck it in my pocket, didn't think anything of it. A month later, Target's executive vice president for their supply chain called me. And I remember my secretary saying, hey, Mitch Stover from Target's on the phone. I said, I don't know any Mitch Stover from Target. She said, well, so I did. And they flew me on some interviews and all that, but I said, I'm not going to go with their target. But if they want to fly me on their dime to interview, I'll practice my interviewing skills. And I liked what they were telling me, and I just liked the vibe of the company. So I ended up taking the job. And as a reminder, they said, your first few months, we want to make sure you're a good cultural fit, because you're coming from a culture that's distinctly different from our culture. And I ended up being a good cultural fit. But here's a funny story, though. After I was officially on board, a few months later, my HR partner said, hey, Mike, let's talk about a couple of things. You're a very outgoing person. You're an extrovert. You relate well to people, but there's some behaviors, some body language that you display sometimes that's disengaging. She said, well, a lot of times you walk around with your hand like this. The classic Army pose, right? I'm largely in charge. All officers do this, right? Or you do this a lot. This is defensive. Or sometimes, you don't make good eye contact when you talk to somebody. And she said you point a lot. I still do that. But she said, those can be intimidating. She said, you have a loud voice, tall. And I said, I had no idea, because nobody in the Army ever gave me that feedback. But she said, I know you're really working hard at engaging with the team here, but sometimes those can be intimidating. Now, that's powerful. So I want you to be my feedback partner and help me work on this, because the last thing I want to do was be disengaging. But I had to be receptive to that feedback, Henry, and then do something with it. And I did. And that was powerful, because I had to adapt to the culture. And some things that I unconsciously carried from the Army culture and the Target's culture weren't working so well. And Target prides itself on its engaged culture. It's hugely important to them.
Right.
And so I had to adapt to that culture. And it was a tremendous learning experience.
Well, two quick things came out of that. One is it's AR 670-1 that says you can't put your hands in your pockets. And we develop all those postures because of that. And the second thing is, wow, it took that young lady, I would say, a lot of courage to step up and call somebody, a senior leader like that, out on the line and say, hey, sir, these are the things that are going on that could be off-putting. But that speaks a lot to the culture that folks are empowered to make that call.
Absolutely. Totally. You're exactly right. But she wanted me to be the best leader I could be, but she also wanted the organization to be successful and engaged and so forth. And I'll be forever thankful to her for that. And by the way, she was a great feedback partner in a lot of things. And probably it was very much like my relationships with my command sergeants major over the years. It was that trusting of a relationship. He was the one who could come in and close the door and just say, oh man, come on, you screwed that one up. And here's how I could have helped you with that. It was powerful. She's forever on my short list of impactful people in my life. I'm still very much in touch with her. Yeah.
So speaking of culture, as a senior leader in both the Army and Target, how do you, from your perspective, develop that culture and build a positive climate with the folks underneath you?
Leaders set the tone. Kind of person who's always walking around saying, it's Thursday, my feet hurt, sun's in my eyes. The whole organization's going to assume that persona. Being a positive person matters, frankly, because you set the tone, leader. Number one. Number two, your visual damn sure ought to match your audio. And so if you say you're going to do something, or if you say this is important to you, then follow through on that. Where you spend your time as a leader matters a lot. If you say, for example, safety is our number one priority, and you're not out check it to make sure that safety procedures are in fact being adhered to. If you're not calling out people who are violating safety policy, but more importantly, Henry, if you are not catching people doing things right and recognizing them in the moment, awesome. That was perfect the way you elevated your order picker and did all the right things to get up on the 8th level and pull that product out and so forth. If you're not doing all those things, then you're not setting the right tone as a leader. But it starts with leadership. And you've heard the expression, I know, the higher up the flagpole, the more your rear end shows. And I think the other thing to understand as a leader is perceptions matter. It doesn't matter where those you lead got whatever perception they have of you as a leader. As far as the leader's concerned, those perceptions are reality. And it's your job to correct them if it's not the perception you want. And so much of what we do as a leader, just by where we spend our time, our mannerisms, our tone of voice, how we react to bad news, etc., all that filters down to the whole organization. And you got to understand that there's tremendous power. You know, as a general officer, I was counseled, and I've read a lot to understand this too. You never get to make a casual comment, and on every word. And there's this famous story about at Fort, and I'm not going to get it right, but at Fort Monroe, the old Fort Monroe in Virginia, a commanding general, I think it was during maybe the interwar years from World War I, World War II, where he was the CG, commanding general, was standing at his office window and looking out towards and he said, what a great view this would be if that tree wasn't in the way. Well, it was like a 200 or 300-year-old magnificent tree. Well, his aide had the damn tree cut down. And there's no way what the hell wanted. It was a remarkable tree. But he said, well, I'll have that cut down so he can have a better view of the world. No, stop. So you don't get to make casual comments, particularly as a senior leader, and you got to understand them.
That is something very similar that Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, when I talked with him a couple of days ago, said, when I asked him the best piece of advice he'd been given, he said, never pass up the opportunity to shut the heck up.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah. You were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You ought to listen a lot more than you talk. Yep.
Right.
Jeff Buchanan, I've got a lot of time for him. I follow him on LinkedIn. He's got always some good things to say. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's all the more important the higher up the flagpole you go. Excuse me, hit my mic there. It's more important the further up the flagpole you go, because as you start to speak, people start to move. And if you're in a staff meeting or an organizational meeting, you're often not going to get clear feedback from the other people if you speak first. They're going to start figuring out how to accomplish what it was that you said. And that was even something that I had to learn as a company commander, was figuring out how to get folks, one, comfortable with telling me that my ideas were dumb, and two, coming up with ideas and generating, and me waiting until the end of my meetings to say something or guidance. I would force the other people to provide answers first before I would say something, because it then gave me the opportunity to slow down and think about it and consider what they had said and think about them first. It's an interesting concept, because oftentimes when you're put in charge of something, you think that you're supposed to be large and in charge. And so I think that ties really well into your book.
Yeah. Well, and I led my organization and Target through some pretty significant change, major change. We grew our workforce and we brought in a lot of automation. And, I felt it was important that I was the face of that change, that at least once a month we had updates with all our team members, our 24/7 operation. And I tell them what I knew, when I could tell them that. And I was very upfront. And I remember talking to my team about this communication strategy to lead the organization through change. And I said, and at the end of these, I'm going to have a question and answer. I want to know what's on their mind. And one of my direct reports said, you think that's smart? Because what if you don't know the answer? I'll say, well, then I'll say, I don't know. Follow up. Why? Sure you want to do that? Yeah. Why is that a problem? Just saying, I don't know, but it's a great question. I don't know, but I'm going to follow up. And so we, put up communication boards, and we would in fact follow up and so forth. But it's okay to say you don't know. I mean, nobody's expected to get all the answers. And the last thing you want to do is get up there and tap dance or say something that you're not sure is true. And then you got to do damage control and all that. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say are the top 3 or 4 pieces of advice that you would give today's generation from your experience both in the Army and as a senior leader in the corporate world?
Funny that, because I just last week spoke to a bunch of high school students at the local high school here. And I said, I was in your shoes 50 years ago. You're all wondering, where am I going to go to college? Where am I going to major in? What are my relationships going to look like? Where am I done that? And I know each of you has a plan right now. It will change. I said, my advice to you is to strive to always be moving forward in your life. Don't want to stagnate. And you get to define what moving forward is. You're growing, you're learning, you're thriving, whatever. You define what moving forward is, but in the process of moving forward, you're going to come to forks in the road. And if you want to keep moving forward, you're going to have to pick one. You may not know what lies down either one of those paths, but trust yourself. It's okay to venture into territory you're not sure how it's going to work out, because that's how you learn. That's how you learn. And number 2, you will fail. You're going to fail in your life multiple times. You're not going to get the job you were seeking. A relationship's going to go bust on you. Okay? But just accept it. The world is far too volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous for you to be successful at everything. So learn from your failures. And that's, I know it's a little bit cliche, but there's a lot of learning that goes along with not succeeding something, but also learn from your successes. When things are going really well, take the time to stop and say, man, what is it that led me to be in this good position? Was it my preparation? Was it serendipity? Was it connecting with the right kinds of people? So learn from both your failures and your successes, I would say. And the other thing is just learn how to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I asked a question. I said, how many of you students here like to get up in front of a group and talk? Not one of the 50 hands. I said, I get it. I was in the same position. I said, how do you think you get better at public speaking? And they all said, by doing it. I said, yeah, so
that's it.
Regardless of how uncomfortable you are, if you want to get better at something that you're not comfortable with, you're going to have to do it. Playing guitar in front of other people is uncomfortable. I admire my sons. They are in a couple of bands in Denver. They perform live all the time. And I'm not quite there yet. I don't trust my skills enough, but I admire them for just how willing they are to get up in front of people and do their thing. And it's hundreds of people sometimes. So those 3 things I think are important to me. You're going to be successful and fail, learn from both. Strive to keep moving forward, and that sometimes means venture into areas that you're not totally comfortable with, but that's how you grow as a leader. And then last thing is take advantage of the fact that there's other people out there who want you to be successful as well. Be an open book. Solicit advice, and sometimes you may have to go with your gut, but by all means, take the time to, if you can, solicit advice from other people. When I was a brigade combat team commander, I went to the National Training Center a couple times. Yeah. Commander of the ops group at the time, Bill Weber, gave me some fantastic advice. He said, and this worked very commonly. He said, Mike, no matter what the situation, no matter what happens, you always have 5 minutes. Use it. take 5 minutes to think through what you need to do next. That was fantastic advice.
Yes, that's incredible. And I just recently heard someone say something similarly along the lines of, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but he said that it's not how, but who, and having the willingness to reach out to other people, seek that advice, and get feedback into your life, I think is vitally important. And you hit the nail on the head with all of that. And the take 5 minutes applies to anybody, anywhere. Leading troops in combat, making a major life decision. Oftentimes we feel rushed that I've got to make a decision and do something right now.
Right.
Stop, take a moment, breathe.
Yeah.
Think through it, seek some feedback, and then make a call of a response rather than a reaction.
Yeah, and don't look back once you do, right?
That's it. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed the conversation and excited to see what's going to come out of this. And where can folks find more about what you're doing now? Where can they find your book, your organization that you're working with now?
The book
Where
is
can they find you?
large and in charge from Board of Journey Involved in Leadership. But my website, MilanoLeadershipServices.com, has information about me, where to get the book, and social media links and so forth. I'm also on Substack, Mike Milano, but my website, Milano Leadership Point. Let me thank you for what you're doing, Henry. Just your mission, trying to help people transition and navigate through life's challenges and so forth, and so forth. That's really powerful. Number one. Number two, thank you for reaching out and giving me a chance to talk with you. Do that.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. And it's an honor to get to speak with you as well. Did you like what you heard on today's podcast? If so, do me a quick favor and hit the like and subscribe button. That way you'll stay updated on all the new content that I publish. Also, visit me on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and tell me what you want to hear more about. I love to hear your comments. That way I can continue to produce content that you love and enjoy. You can also check out my website, henrybiemann.com.